Yeah, let's take your first question, and I'll give a little bit of the history here. I think it's no secret to this group that the agency's original position when we were drafting Part 117 was to look in a consolidated way across the whole aviation industry and to make a determination of a cost-benefit case, which is a methodology that, frankly, I'm not wild about. It's a rather antiquated way that you determine the costs and benefits associated with a regulatory action, but it's required by a piece of legislation called the or a regulation called the Administrative Procedures Act. And let me pause there for a minute. What I don't like about the Administrative Procedures Act is that the cost-benefit methodology that you use is backward-looking. What you are looking at is what accident would you have prevented by the promulgation of this new rule. We all know that the problem we have in aviation is we are not having a lot of accidents, but we know there is risk in the system. And the way the cost-benefit methodology is calculated is essentially the cost and benefits associated with lives saved. So that's the methodology that we're dealing with. It was the FAA's position when we put forward the rule that we would treat all the users of the system, in a consolidated, pooled way, and what we're really looking at is the system overall. New rulemakings go to the President's Office of Management and Budget, where it goes through a regulatory analysis, and it was at that point that we were asked to break it into the different segments of the industry. So passenger flights, cargo flights, and so on down the line. And going back to that methodology I just talked about, what you are counting is lives saved, and you are doing a comparison of a plane load full of passengers versus a plane load full of cargoes, the numbers simply didn't add up. Now, this was not something that on a personal level I feel is good public policy, because we're flying in the entire, everyone's flying in the same system. It's not like we have cargo airspace versus passenger airspace and so on down the line. But it is nonetheless where we are. And we were presented with a choice of no rule or having a rule that addressed the lion's share of what we saw out there of needing to address the very valid question of flight duty time, rest periods, and so on down the line. So I know that you have had a number of discussions on Capitol Hill about how to address that, and you didn't ask me to give you a roadmap, but I'm going to give you one. The most unhelpful thing that would come from Congress would be, if something were to be enacted, would be something that said, the administrator is hereby directed to promulgate a rule that. Because then what that does is it directs us to go into the same process we couldn't emerge from on the back end. Where we would still have to deal with the same methodology and cost-benefit framework and so forth. The way to do it is to, if you go that route, is to legislatively amend Part 117 itself, because then it takes effect upon, enactment of the law. Now, as you know, that there are a lot of people that do not support that, and that is ultimately something, that would need to resolve itself. But I do think that that as a matter of public policy, our position is that it is one system, and what we really want to have is a system that's really safe for all the users out there. I would also encourage you to work, and I know that there has been a lot of good work that's been done voluntarily with the companies that are out there, and I don't think that we should not focus on those things at the same time, because the issue of fatigue, and I think in the cargo industry, I hear two arguments. I hear it's a global industry that its operating characteristics are very different than a largely domestic passenger industry, and you need to have the flexibility to deal with, what are the operational realities of the cargo industry. But I think the flip side of that is also true, is a global industry that has very unique characteristics which may contribute to the fatigue of the crew members. And those are things that we have to have a mechanism for being able to understand and being able to appropriately deal with. And so, I think that's a great question, and I think this is something that, is, in my own personal view, a bit of unfinished business that, as a nation, we need to come up with a way to address. Yeah, basically, the laser incidents have been increasing over the last couple of years, and this is one of those things that what we've seen is, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a very focused and targeted education and enforcement activity with the FBI, with local law enforcement, and so on down the line. And we are trying to engage that again because one of the things that we have seen is that things have been creeping up, and it is something that I'm very concerned about. It does seem to be kind of locally driven. There are a couple of there are a handful of hot spots: New York, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Dallas, Fort Worth, which is where we're seeing the highest numbers. Also, places like Chicago as well. Some of that is just dense urban areas, but I think that clearly we need to get our law enforcement partners to much more aggressively prosecute these kinds of activities, and that is stuff that we are working on. What we are finding is police work is inherently local, and a lot of that means spending a lot of time with the local police departments. Now, what we do with your reports is what we want to make a determination of is where hotspots are, where we can, like, some of the most productive things that we have seen is, for example, there might be a number of them that are emanating from what is clearly a park. And so that provides us an opportunity then to, work with local law enforcement. We're getting large numbers of reports. They are coming from this place. We need you to go over. Here is what the enforcement guidance is. Here are the things that they are violating. Take action. And we do that. And we work through our local facilities in order to create those partnerships with law enforcement. The other thing that we're also technologically starting to analyze is people have come to us and have kind of shared tools that actually give us more precise location information. And so we're seeing if there's some technology that can assist us as well. Keep the reports coming. Those are things that give us a lot of data that we need so that we can actually take enforcement action. And, clearly it's not going to help us deal with the guy right then. But what we have found is if there is a pattern of enforcement that starts to develop in a community, what you're creating is kind of a peer culture where you might have somebody that wants to do a stupid thing or somebody that doesn't really understand, how dangerous these things are. And so not only do we want to get to them, we want to get to their friends and neighbors, to basically, make sure that there are resources out there in the community, other people that are saying, what are you doing, you idiot? Stop it, because this is very dangerous to do. And so we are focusing again on lasers. It's a little more problematic on the unmanned aircraft side because it's actually easier to track a laser to a location than it is an unmanned aircraft that's flying around there. But thanks for bringing that up. It is something we're concerned about. Yeah, I can't tell you exactly what's in the rule that we're going to promulgate later this year. I will say this, though. It is looking at the basic fundamental principles of aviation, which is certification of the operator and the certification of the aircraft itself. And what are the characteristics that we are looking for in terms of the operator versus what needs to be certified on the aircraft side? Because the ones that are very small, I think most people don't care about, all the way up to the ones that are quite large. And we do have about a dozen active certification projects that are underway right now for aircraft where we are laying out new standards there. But I think that, commercial, and let me back up a little bit. Here's what we sort of need to deal with. The legal framework of aviation is premised upon a notion that someone the FAA has made some determination of a basic level of safety. And the two tools that we have traditionally used have been the certification of the operator, the pilot, some other operator, and then the safety of the aircraft itself. And so those are the two things in a regulatory context that any rule for a new user in the system, we need to make a finding in both of those areas. And that's what the rulemaking process, this is actually going to be part 107, is really all about, to start to lay the foundation for that. We had an upstream step we needed to get through, which is we first had to litigate whether, in fact, these were aircraft. Fortunately, the court sided with us and determined that they are. And then that formed the basis for us to require registration and everything that goes with that. And so, yes, training becomes really important, but I think we also have to recognize that we're dealing with a fundamentally different thing than we have dealt with in the past. And so how we define that is something that becomes really important. It's a good question. My problem is that what people are debating is the wrong thing. My position is quite clear. What the agency needs is funding stability, funding flexibility, and the ability to establish priorities. And anything that gets us that is a discussion that we need to have. My problem is the debates that are taking place are all about structure, and we are having zero conversation about any of those three factors. And let me give you a couple of specific examples of that funding stability question that I see floating around out there. The FAA's operations are supported primarily through four sources of funding today: airline ticket taxes, airline fuel taxes, registration fees, and then a miscellaneous category that includes overflight fees and so on down the line. In real terms, airline ticket taxes, which is the largest part of what supports the agency, have been flat. And the reason for that is that the airlines have gone to a model of ancillary fees, bag fees, seat fees, and so on down the line. The tax is quite clear. The tax can only be charged on the cost of air transportation. So all of that revenue, which is the fastest growing segment of revenue to the airlines, is exempt from airline ticket taxes. That's problem one. Problem two is fuel taxes are set on a per gallon basis. And they are set in, very precise terms what they need to be. What are we trying to achieve through NextGen? We're reducing fuel burn. So essentially, we are shooting ourselves in the foot when we deploy things like PBN. We are actually reducing the collections to the agency, that we can use to fund the air traffic operation. Third factor is overflight fees, and the miscellaneous category is pretty stable. Let me take registry fees. It costs you exactly $5 to register an aircraft on the Registry of the United States of America for 3 years. And that $5 is set in statute. And so what does all this mean? Well, what all this means is there is a widening disconnect between what it costs to operate the facility and what are the revenue sources that we have available. And no one is talking about any of that. The discussion that everyone is having is you need a new structure in place before you can even have that conversation. And here's the problem with that. The bill as drafted by the House includes in the proposed structure a lot of carve-outs that are going to limit the ability of a subsequent corporation, such as GA shall never pay fees. Now, when I talk to general aviation pilots, what I hear is, I don't want to pay a per flight fee because I don't want there to be a disincentive to file a flight plan. That is a good public policy argument. But I've heard from GA pilots that registry fee is ridiculous. And shouldn't you have the ability to assess fees there that can cover the cost of, what the operation of the system would look like? And so my feeling is this. My feeling is we need to have the conversation of where the money comes from, what we're spending it on, and how we set priorities. And out of that conversation, a structure will emerge. But I think that if you set up the structure, limit it with a bunch of carve-outs, I'm not sure that you're really addressing what is, at its core, the major problem that we have that we're trying to resolve. You have, on one hand, major airlines that are saying the system is completely broken. I don't agree with that. I think we've made a lot of progress in deployment of modernization of the system, and that's been with a lot of hard work with all of you. You also have a major airline that's saying everything is just fine. The reality is neither of those are true. And what we need to be having is a conversation about what the long-term needs of air traffic and what the agency as a whole are. And we're just not there. We're talking about board seats and structures and all of that sort of stuff. And I think that we really need to focus on, getting our heads around what is the problem we're trying to solve. And I think it's this set of funding issues that I just talked about. Yeah, I was pretty confident this was going to come up. Okay, first of all, I think you're well aware of the firewall that exists between the certification of new international services versus what we do on the safety side. And as you know, we are not in that conversation, and that is because Congress made a determination that they wanted to separate the commercial aspects of how they certify air carriers versus the regulation of the safety side, which we do at the FAA. So all that's a long way of saying I don't have any visibility into where that conversation is going, which leads you to your second point, which is international aviation is founded on a recognition of one authority of the competency of another. And that is an ongoing conversation that we have with all of our partners all around the world. And that is why we put companies in category 2. When we really look at, do they have the competence and the capability to oversee their airline industry? And as you can see, we have not hesitated to do that where we have identified a problem. And that is an ongoing process that we continue to go through. Clearly, we have, I don't think I'm speaking out of school, when I say that I think we have a great industry, we have a great relationship with the industry. ALPA has been a very, very big part of it, and it has gotten us to an unprecedented level of safety. And as Tim well knows, to the point that other modes of transportation are coming to us and asking what they can learn from us in aviation. And I think that's a great story to tell. I can't speculate on what the future is going to hold, but it is something that we're keeping an eye on, and it is something that is very focused on a government-to-government basis between us and our counterparts around the world. But I think that it's an important public policy question. I know you guys have been active on it, and it is something that I think we as a country need to be very thoughtful and careful about as we think about how this industry is going to evolve.